Hey everybody, Ray Pastore here. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about some instructional design topics. The topic for today is learning strategies, instructional strategies. What does that mean when I say that? I'm going to talk about a few different instructional strategies today, and we're going to get into the topic. One of my favorite topics that we talk about, and I'm going to show some stuff on my screen here. You can see I got the green screen going on today. I got a little Minecraft background. I'm in Minecraft. I was in Minecraft in a meeting yesterday. So I'm in Minecraft today. Um, so instructional strategies, instructional strategies, instructional strategies. Um, I actually had a conversation with someone yesterday or 2 days ago. I don't know. The days are all blended together because I'm in like a bazillion meetings right now, due to like mostly advising and some other stuff going on. But for some reason, in instructional design, as an instructional designer, one of the places that I see my students and I see others get very confused about is in the design phase. When they actually go to design instruction, they're very unsure. Hold on, something just popped up on my screen. I got to make sure I can see chat. But they get very confused during the design phase. And confusion in instructional design always boggles my mind personally, because instructional design is it's so easy. It's really a very simple process. It is not as complicated as like trying to, program a computer to talk. It's a very simple process. Now there are complicated parts to it. As you get into details, there is complication. There are things where experience matters significantly. But as a whole, our field does not need to be confusing, does not need to be complicated. And one of the things that I found as I read through probably hundreds of instructional design books is that design is extremely confusing. I could never figure it out until I really started practicing instructional design. And once I started practicing, I started asking myself, well, why was it so this is a pretty easy thing to do. Why is it so confusing in all these texts? And then I found a book that I actually loved, and I thought explained design. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the way I explained it in my book, which I believe is not perfect either, but good because I understand it that way. But they did the best job of explaining it. And that's Smith and Reagan's instructional design book. I thought they did the best job of explaining design. So let's take a look. Let's get into design, specifically focusing on instructional strategies, and talk about what that means. Let me shrink myself. Woo! Let's see. Let's go to right there. Shrink myself down. Let's shrink my name down a little bit. So right there. Perfect. Okay. So, instructional strategies. So what I have up on the screen here, you can actually see I have something highlighted here. I'm sharing my desktop with y'all. Up on the screen here, I have something highlighted. This is from my book. When I start to talk about design, and we'll talk about why this is confusing for people. So, you know what? Let me get right out of my book and let's go to some websites. So, if you go to websites and you start to type in how do you design, what are instructional strategies, you come up with websites like this. And basically the problem with these kinds of books is that all of them, when they explain what instructional strategies are, they explain that instructional strategies are generally a strategy for teaching, in that they are a way to get people to learn. So I've explained before that when I teach a course, there's some kind of me, presenting some kind of content and then having the learners remember some kind of content. A lot of these instructional strategies websites, what they do, I'll go to a different one as well. All they're doing is, let me scroll down to this. All that they are focusing on is the presenting the content and getting the learners to remember. That's what the instructional strategies are teaching people when you type it in, and you learn about design and they talk about getting people to learn and getting people to remember. But then all of a sudden there's all these other different models out there, right? Like I have students, they'll talk about, well, hold on, let me just show the rest of these. Basically all the same thing. different instructional strategies. But what a lot of these are missing is the organization of the course and the development, the presentation portion. 10 example instructional strategies: micro-learning, spaced repetition, interactivity, gamification, leaderboards, peer learning, mobile learning, just-in-time training. Now, these are all correct. These are instructional strategies. The problem is they're only one small piece of design of getting someone to learn. So what I liked about Smith and Reagan is they divided instructional strategies into 3 different types, which I thought was absolutely brilliant, and that's what I do. I divided it into 3 different types. I love the way they did it, and I divide my instructional strategies into 3 different types. And really, I could call these, instead of the 3 types of I'm like disappearing on my screen based on the color of my shirt and my green screen. There are 3, I don't need to define these as 3 types of instructional strategies. I could say this is design, or I could call this whatever I want to. With the terminology, doesn't matter. As long as you understand these 3 things, it will so help you understand instructional design. So let's talk about them. There are 3 types of instructional strategies: organizational, delivery, and development. 3 types: organizational, delivery, development. Let me explain what each of those are. Okay, so when I went to these other websites here, all that they're showing me are the delivery instructional strategies. So what happens is people get all confused about how they bunch these all together, because there are other types of instructional strategies, and the problem is they're all bunched together in a website like this with no explanation as to how or when you really want to apply these. So what I've done is I've tried to make it very clear, just as Smith and Reagan did, and explain how instructional strategies apply to a course. So the first kind of instructional strategies are organizational strategies. Organizational strategies. What are organizational strategies? Organizational strategies are the outline of my course. How am I presenting my content? What is the order? What does that mean? So generally what I like to tell people is that I do several things when I teach a course. I somehow get my learners motivated for learning. I excite them somehow. I present I tell them what they've learned. I remind them of what they've learned. I present the content, present content, however. I get them to remember that content somehow. And then I get them to apply that content in some way. Very similar to Gagne's 9 events, or Keller, or any of the big, Dick and Carey, any of their organizational strategies, right? So if I actually scroll down here in my book and we get to here, let me shrink myself a little more here. Oop, I'm really shrinking myself big time. I'm also disappearing a little bit. Need to not wear blue shirts when I use my green screen. Okay, so what I've done here, this is the first type, organizational strategies. What I've done is I have a general organization strategy, and then I've looked at others. Like you can look at Gagne's 9 events, Dick and Carey. Here's the thing. All these organizational strategies are the same. We have an introduction where we gain the learner's attention. We present the content. We get them to remember the content, and we assess it. And if we want to, we can have them use it in some way so they can apply it to new situations. That's it. That's the organizational strategy. Here's what gets confusing to people. I will ask someone, well, what strategies are you using to design this course? How are you going to design it? And they might say Gagne's 9 events. But then what they don't do is mention any delivery strategies or development strategies. Here's the key component. Here's why I break these into 3 things. I break these into 3 things because for every course you design, there has to be an organizational strategy. There has to be a delivery strategy, and there has to be a development strategy. You don't just use one. You don't just say, oh, my instructional strategy is Keller ARCs. Well, how are you organizing? What's your organizational strategy? Well, what are your development strategies? Because you just gave me a delivery strategy. Okay. Or they say, I'm just using Gagne's 9 events. And I'm like, well, how are you going to get your learners to learn? And they'll say, oh, problem-based learning. And I say, okay, so you also have a delivery strategy too. The reason people get confused is because they haven't broken it out. So that's why I break it out into these three sections: organizational, delivery, and development. All right, let's move a little further here. And guys, if you have any questions, please ask as I go through here. Because I know this stuff really well, and sometimes that means that I will not explain as much as I should because someone is confused on a certain point. So please always ask me as I'm going through this. Even if you watch this at a later date, please leave comments for me and let me know what you have questions on, because I can come back and ask. Okay, so we have our organizational strategy. The general organizational strategy, most people use Gagne's 9 events, but there are a bunch of other ones that tell you how to organize your course or your content. And some people ask, well, how do I organize my course for if I'm using video or games or whatever? That's my strategy to really teach this. You just modify it. That's all. I actually have a video where I've talked about modifying Gagne's 9 events for a video-based course. How would you do that? Because you can't necessarily do everything. So I talk about how you would do that. So go check that out if you're interested in seeing it. But you do have to modify it. And that's why I've created this generic one here, because I think it's better. When I actually write the updated version of this book, which potentially will be this summer, but I may do an esports book this summer, so it may be 2 summers from now. When I update this book, I'm going to focus more on the main things that I do when I teach a course, which are presenting content to learners and getting learners to memorize, then getting learners to practice. Those 3 areas that I feel like are just missed so often that we don't think about. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm showing my organizational strategy, my general strategy, and how delivery strategies apply to it. So what are these delivery strategies? Delivery strategies, when I go to any of these websites and they're giving me all these cool things I could do, like exit tickets, anchor activities, KWL charts, whatever it is, prizing strategies, just-in-time training, whatever it is they're talking about in instructional strategy, they're most often always talking about my delivery strategies. So how do delivery strategies and organizational strategies work together? How do these things work together? Well, you can't have your organizational strategy without delivery strategy. So here's an example. In my introduction of a course, I want to do a few things. I want to motivate my learners. I want to get them focused on the topic at hand, right? They have to be thinking about what's going on. I want them to forget about all the stuff that's happening in the outside world and the news, this and that, and focus on the learning task at hand. So I have to motivate them, and I have to give them their learning objectives and tell them what they're going to be doing. So one strategy to do that is using a motivation model like Keller ARCs. Or, there's a bunch of different delivery strategies I could use. A case study or whatever it happens to be that I want to do. Have them play a game. Whatever I want to do for my introduction. But so I have my organizational strategy, and then I have my delivery strategies. Okay, now we have content, presentation, and learning, which in Gagne's is like several steps here. I could use problem-based learning, game-based learning, worked examples, lecture, video, activities. These are all my delivery strategies. How am I assessing? Well, I could have tests, projects, assignments, knowledge checks, all kinds of different stuff, right? And how do I get them to apply this to new situations and really problem solve? I could have them do drills. I could have some kind of simulation or sandbox, coaching, mentorship, job aids, giving them a job aid to apply it, all kinds of different stuff that I can do. But those are my delivery strategies. So that's how organizational and delivery strategies work together. That's how they are applied together. So when I see someone tell me I'm using 7 different strategies, they may be for one course. That makes sense. Where it gets confusing is people say I'm using 5 models, and they say Gagne's and problem-based learning, but don't really explain how that works together. This is how you work it together, which is why I explain it like this. Then we get to our next thing. And our next thing that we have are development strategies. So let's talk about development strategies. Development strategies are strategies that I'm going to use I'm scrolling down here to get to some of them at least. Development strategies are all my usability strategies that I'm going to use to get people to learn from this, that are going to make things easier for my learners. So some of them, for example, could be, I'm scrolling through here kind of quick, but I'm trying to get to this one section. There's so many different, I know I talk about usability in here, and I talk about the multimedia principles. So if we scroll to, like, for example, the multimedia, I have, here we go, development strategies. And we start with the multimedia principles. So the multimedia principles are my development strategies. These are strategies I'm using for development to get people to learn, to potentially minimize cognitive load, and to make sure my learners are learning effectively. I have these development strategies. For example, the split attention principle, modality principle, redundancy principle, coherence principle. I won't give you the advantages or disadvantages of these right now because I have some thoughts about, well, I can tell you one thing about these these principles, and that is take them with a grain of salt. Most of them, when you go and look at the research, when you go and actually read the studies that created these principles, you start to find that there's not as many studies as you thought there was, because I did a meta-analysis on them and there wasn't many. And the other thing was that a lot of the studies didn't really use a lot of participants, and the environment was almost too controlled that I don't know if these would apply in real life. Especially when we take out things like someone working and motivation and things like that out of the equation. It's very difficult to say if these worked, especially because a lot of the content that was used to test these and assessments, we don't have the reliability and validity information of them. So I don't know if they were done well, or there was no prior knowledge. So I don't really know if the learners were all equal or not. So there's a bunch of problems with some of the research, but overall, like a blanket statement is that these are good and you should consider them in your development. And then there are other things like development strategies, which are usability things, like no busy backgrounds, stuff like that. Colors are consistent. You don't use more than several colors, all the different things that can apply to human-computer interaction as well. So there are a bunch of different development strategies that you might use for a course. And when you put all of these together, you've now done, there are 3 different types of strategies that help you effectively teach people stuff, minimizing cognitive load and making things easier on the user. And that's your organization of your course, your delivery strategies, and your development strategies. Those 3 things. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. It's very simple. I mean, you have to pick and choose what you want to use, which can make it complicated. But other than that, it's a very simple process, and you would be amazed, absolutely amazed, how many times I've looked at instruction and it doesn't have any of these, or maybe it just has one of these, and that's it. It doesn't have any more. It happens all the time. I see this. I mean, I see this professionally in the field all the time where we're just missing this. I see it a lot with students. They just haven't grasped the concept of what all of these things are and don't include them in a course. That's why I break them up into these 3 sections. When I saw Smith and Reagan do that, right away, light bulb, brilliant, 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 brilliant. So yeah, that's everything. That's what I wanted to go through today. I like this topic just because people don't understand it so well, and I think it's extremely important as an instructional designer to understand this. So there's no questions. If anybody does have any questions, please let me know. Comment in the video right below. Just comment and I will respond to you. And as always, have a great day. I enjoy doing these learning live sessions. I'm going to try to do another one this week, which will be focused on esports, and I got a bunch of